Hello. Good morning, Nolan, Bitcoiner. Another episode of The Breakup, a show where we look at our relationship with money, our psychological relationship with money, and do some predictions. We try to predict where this psychological relationship will lead, basically, right? Part of our frame here is that we always think of money, we're in a relationship with money. We are, whether we like it or not, in a relationship with the US dollar. As a Bitcoiner, I've cultivated a new type of psychological relationship with my money. I guess all relationships are psychological. So we'll just say I've cultivated a new relationship with money, one that I think is beneficial and one I want to share. And I use the frame of breaking up because that's really what it's about, right? When you break up with something, you almost have to deconstruct the imaginary future you've built with that person, usually, right? In the case of money, it's the imaginary future we've created with the US dollar in the middle. So what we do here is contrast the future that's possible with the dollar to the future that's possible with Bitcoin. And those predictions are pretty good anchors for our own worldview today and as a pretty good measuring stick to go back and change your idea if you need to, right? Because that's probably the only way to do it, is to be public about your predictions, find out if they worked out, and then adjust wherever you went wrong. Wherever you think your prediction went wrong, you can adjust. As a Bitcoiner, we got a lot right over the years so far, but we don't want to take that for granted. It doesn't mean we have anything right in the future. But it's one reason why I've started this show, is because you get something right. I could just sit around and count my Bitcoins maybe for the rest of my life. But my strategy, I think, is more to stay sharp, make sure I can still predict things, and to have that feedback loop. Because at this point, I can't necessarily get it by making the right bets on money, even though that's a game unto itself, not one that I really play. I'm more of a saver of Bitcoin than a trader or speculator, or trying to find crazy ways to get more. I always like more, right? Anyone likes more, but that's not really the game I'm playing here. It's not a market show. Why is Bitcoin up or down today? I don't care. It's really about your predictions, right? So today I want to talk about a Mike Solana article. Mike Solana is from Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. He's been getting a lot of attention lately. I think he's really, sort of getting a voice that is starting to really shape the overall discussion that people are in on Twitter, or perhaps even in finance. I only know him from Twitter, but I definitely notice his tweets every time they come into my timeline. And today he wrote a piece on Substack around social amnesia, and I wanted to share some of his logic and then sort of complete the thought as I saw it with the Bitcoin piece. So what he did with this idea of social amnesia is take a few examples of things that we spoke about or speak about in the news, and then he describes how they got supplanted or twisted or replaced in some instances with a similar idea that was able to harness a lot of the energy but then redirect it into a different direction. So the first one he gave here is Occupy Wall Street, right? And he said, and you can see this. I saw an amazing graph yesterday. I mean, never take my data or graphs I see for truth. You can go look at it yourself if you need to. And most data you come across is just a complete fabrication. Maybe this too, right? I'm not positive. But it struck me that nevertheless. That from 2012, it was a graph of the number of times racism was cited in the New York Times, right? So the number of times racism was cited in the New York Times. And you look at it through history, I think the scale I saw it on, it had about 40 years. It was pretty constant. I don't know the exact number. It was like 20 articles, maybe a year. I don't remember the exact metric. But it was, a pretty modest amount. And then you see Occupy Wall Street happen in 2011. 2011. You see it happen in 2011. And then between 2011 and 2012, the graph just goes like this. It looks like our money supply graph, right? It goes from 20, let's say, articles a day on, I'm making those numbers up, I don't remember off the top of my head. It goes from like 20 articles with the word racism in them to like 5x. And then every year it does another doubling, right? It just goes whoosh, real exponential stuff. So racism. And in a lot of ways, those have become the dividing lines, right? Occupy Wall Street sort of brought everyone together, said 99%, 1%, big problem. All of a sudden, we're now back in a game where racism is the number one issue. And I believe racism is a major issue in America, so I'm not arguing against racism being a major issue. What I'm merely trying to underline here is that Occupy Wall Street transformed in public consciousness into racism. Racism occupied racism occupied the Occupy Wall Street movement, right? Racism occupied the Occupied Wall Street movement. And that, has taken up all the oxygen in the room. You can see that pretty regularly from that chart I just described in the New York Times. The next one, the lab leak theory for COVID-19. So lab leak, when it first started, was treated as a racist idea. You couldn't say China had caused the Wuhan virus, right? You remember the previous president used to call it the China virus, the Wuhan virus. You're a racist. It's terrible, right? Can't say that. It went so far as to just this past May 2021, they were still censoring on Facebook. Facebook was still censoring lab leak theories that place the origins of the virus at the Wuhan lab, right? That was censored, not allowed to say it, right? And of course, replaced with this idea of racism. Now you can talk about the lab leak, no problem. But here's another way to see the continuation of this problem, and Mike Solana brings it up. The COVID variants were taking on Greek names in order, right? So Delta, Epsilon, da 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 da. So they had all of the Greek alphabet, and then there's an order to it: A, B, C, D, and there's alpha, beta. Same idea in the Greek alphabet, right? An order. The rightful place for this virus, the Omicron virus, would have been the new virus, NU. That was scrapped by the WHO, and they said, well, new is kind of confusing because it makes it sound like it's new as in NEW. Okay, so they went from new, but the next one is Xi, right? Like the president of China. But that one wasn't taken. So for a minute, Omicron was called new, and then it was called Omicron, but it jumped over the Xi, right? President Xi. Because, of course, the WHO didn't want the president of China being too closely associated in our minds with the name of this virus, right? So, well, I'm mind reading the WHO, but that's what it looks like, right? So it was skipped over. There hasn't been any explanation of why, right? It just skipped over, okay? And we continue to talk about Omicron the way we do. Here's another one, Wakeusha. What happened there again? I can't even keep the idea in my mind, right? What happened in Wakeusha is Waukesha is a few days after the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict at a Christmas parade. An African American male. You have to say the race of the person in this day and age. Unfortunately, it's important to the story. Drove through a crowd of parade watchers and killed a bunch of people. I don't even remember how many, right? I don't even remember. I barely remember the details at this point. I haven't heard of it since, right? That was something called a memory hole, just gone, right? The main point of Mike Solana's article is to discuss nuclear power. I've been talking about it on this show for the past few days, and we're talking about the Diablo Canyon nuclear reactor in California. And rightly so, the LA Times has been pilloried by me twice now. This is my third video mentioning it since it came out, and it came out on Monday, and I guess we're Wednesday today, so I've been doing it every day. So this Diablo Canyon, the editors, not an op-ed, the editors of the LA Times argued dangerous, right? They said nuclear power, dangerous. Remember Chernobyl, what do we do with the garbage? None of these problems are solved. This is insane because engineers have been saying for years now that they have solved these problems. Other countries are running with this. France, England, China, all these countries are saying portable nuclear reactors are the future and the way to go. In California, the problem, and this is the way Mike Solana underlines it, it's not so much that nuclear works and the engineers have figured out some of the problems. It's that it works too well, right? So it removes the conversation around limiting consumption and limiting energy usage, because and then it takes away the ability to say, well, um, we can't solve global warming without limiting our own consumption, right? That argument goes away, because with nuclear you can actually consume more energy, right, and have less greenhouse gas. So it's too efficient, therefore dangerous, right? Not treated as a viable solution, even though it clearly is the solution, as far as I can tell, right? It is the solution. Now, before we get to this last one, inflation, right? I just want to mention how social amnesia works really quickly, because there's one other word that I thought was just great, and it was anti-meme, and that's what Mike Solana came up with, this anti-meme. And that fits into this idea of mega politics, right? So we're not just talking about social amnesia. What I'm doing is talking about Mike Solana's article, Social Amnesia, but in the context of this idea called mega politics. So what are mega politics? Mega politics are a big, big idea in a book that most Bitcoiners find really predictive, right? So Bitcoiners use this book called The Sovereign Individual, written in the 1990s, and use it as a forecasting model in many instances, because it predicts what many people who've read the book believes is the world we're in today. It does predict something like Bitcoin happening, right? And because this thing like Bitcoin happens, the basic argument of this book is, and what are megapolitics, right? Megapolitics are kind of like the trends beyond individual choices that happen to shift society in one way or the other. The example used in the Sovereign Individual book is the printing press as a mega political force. It's a mega political force because it didn't mean that people chose to end the church's monopoly on power and a type of caste system in the feudal world. Um, it wasn't about ending that as a political choice. What happened was, and the book underlines this, the printing press simply disseminated a certain amount of power to people that made the question of what is the church going to do to solve this or that sort of obsolete. Or another way to put it is, I wrote it down. Let me see what I wrote. This was a good one, so I want to share it. Did I really write it down? Yeah, I might have wrote it in another piece. Let me read it though. I do want to say what I did, because it was a pretty good explanation, and I had it sort of trickily worded. Here it is. Okay. So I was trying to define megapolitics simply, and what I said was it's a force. Beyond taste. So the way I described it here is, um, it's the ability to rein in the false choice of what the church was going to do to your opinion, right? So it's the false choice. The church was making your opinion, right? So it's the false choice. The church gave you a false choice of opinions. Should the church do this or that to solve starving? Should we have another pilgrimage or another nunnery set up? And then that should solve feeding the people, right? So none of these things were really going to solve the problem, but it gave you the choices, and then you chose between them. So what you were going to do with the church's opinion. It flipped it to what you were going to do with what the church's opinion. I'm not doing a good job explaining this. Let me try again. So megapolitics, force beyond personal choice, right? It's a force beyond a personal choice. Printing press was used in the Sovereign Individual as this example, right? So the printing press changed the power dynamics such that it wasn't a choice to limit the church. It was an inevitable result of limiting the church, because people had this newfound power, and didn't have to rely on what the church said to make an opinion, right? They could take what the church said as advice and then make their opinion, because they had other resources, because now literacy was able to propagate around the world, right? So you get it? A little bit of a roundabout way. I'd just been writing about this, and I thought I had created a great explanation, but it didn't turn out as well as I thought. But anyway, megapolitics beyond the individual economic choices that people would make, right? It's not about buying a Coke or a Pepsi. It's about the invention of, sugar, water in general, right? And now a huge supply. So megapolitics. And the way it's described here is that anti-memes and memes are forms of megapolitics, right? Anti-memes and memes. Memes we know are forms of megapolitics because they pack a ton of information into a small container and allow for ideas to propagate faster than they ever have, right? An anti-meme is similar, but it's a way of replacing an idea, in this case used in social amnesia, with replacing the division of Occupy Wall Street, we know it's us versus them, with a new us versus them dividing line, in this case, racism, right? So the anti-memes sort of blunt your ability to think clearly because they replace a thought with another, right? So the same thing was done with the lab leak, right? Same thing was done with Wakeusha, but it was just sort of forgotten, right? Nuclear power, certainly there, right? It's an anti-meme. You don't propagate the thought of a full world built on nuclear power because engineers have solved the problems and it's now possible. Instead, you reapply the old idea of danger, right? Anti-memes. They basically stunt the idea of the propagation of an idea. Memes like genes, right? That's where the mimetic idea, genetic and mimetic, come together for that reason, right? It's the same idea. Ideas have sex the same way people have sex, right? And create new ideas or new people. So when ideas have sex, that's what's happening in a meme, right? The ideas are basically having an orgy. In a really good meme, right? You have a bunch of ideas having sex and it creates a new idea, right? And that's what makes these things mega political, right? They're beyond individual choices. You can't unsee memes when you see them, right? Just like you can't unsee an anti-meme, right? They're absorbed into your mind and they become a filter that you use to, now you could get rid of them if you don't think they're good and you can create new ones. But here's the fun part and why you can be happy that we live in the time that we live in, and you can get set up and get ready to break up with the US dollar because social amnesia, right, gets stunted by mega politics. Mega political forces are so much more powerful than the limited gauge of social amnesia, right? You could only twist an idea so much with the social amnesia trick, right? But take inflation, for example, right? There's been a lot of social amnesia layered on to inflation so far. We've heard it was transitory. Now we hear it's not transitory, but it's, it's not a big deal. Maybe it's good for you, you're starting to hear, right? So the ability to use megapolitics to twist an idea has limits. The memes and anti-memes are powerful, right? But Bitcoin itself is a meme, right? It's a psychological commodity. The thing itself is a meme, right? It already packs mimetic power. And the mega political comes into the forefront when you start limiting people's food, right? When you start saying and reminding people every day when they go to the grocery store that food is more expensive, right? It becomes a lot more difficult to deploy anti-mimetic powers and social amnesia when you have a constant reminder. And we see that in a really fun story yesterday when, Senator, they call her Senator Karen now, I guess, but it's that Elizabeth Warren lady, she's a senator from Massachusetts, a pretty big fraud, it turns out, right? Did the thing with the native ancestry, didn't work out. The former president, Trump, used to call her Pocahontas, which I always thought was a fun name. Well, I mean, it got a little old, but, he sort of made sure, you'd think the joke was going to die and he found new ways to use it. And then she's just, a contemptible person. So you kind of, go along with it. But anyway, she had this tweet where, she was pillorying Elon Musk. Wouldn't it be nice if the richest man in the country paid his fair share? Rah. And of course, on Twitter, Elon Musk, who has really taken over Trump's role as the provocateur in chief of the whole platform, just smashed her and said, you remind me of one of those mothers always nagging you what to do, and Senator Karen, don't tell on me, and you already spent the money, who cares? Just, and tons of attention, right? Tons of attention. And what we see is inflation itself is more immune to social amnesia and more affected by megapolitical trends than any of these other issues, which are a little bit one-off. Nuclear power certainly could be a megapolitical force, but at the stage of growth that it's at right now in America, it's not quite there, right? It's not megapolitical until it has its own momentum and its own psychological force. I think we're pretty much there, but there's a little way to go. But inflation, very difficult to use the social amnesia tool because you're reminded of it every day, right? You're reminded of every time you go to McDonald's, every time you get a soda, anytime you get a cup of coffee, anytime you go for the most basic provisions. That's why the Big Mac index was so good at highlighting purchasing power around the world, right? It showed the Big Mac index was an index in the Economist magazine for many years that showed US purchasing powers, but denominated in Big Macs. So you'd understand, basically, McDonald's knew in every market what the average person was making, and they knew they wanted to get the average person to come there every day for lunch, or a certain amount of these people. So everything's calibrated to get that demographic, and not to get the American one if you're in South Korea, for example, right? I lived in South Korea for many years, and I remember saying, wow, the Big Macs are so cheap here. I think it was like $3.50 for the Big Mac trio when I was living there just 10 years ago. So $3.50, and they put bacon and tomato on the lunch special for the Big Mac trio. And so that's why it was such a good tool, right? Because people could find reference to it and understand what their ability to buy things in a different market was. So my purchasing power was much higher in South Korea. And you understand these metrics when they're presented to you every single day. It becomes a lot more difficult to apply this formula of social amnesia and to leverage megapolitical forces like anti-memes and memes when the thread of those is even more powerful, like Bitcoin being a meme itself and inflation being beyond a single policy choice. It encapsulates everything. So the argument then is that, and the whole point of this episode is that the time to break up is coming quickly, and this can happen fast. And we see it already when we look at Fox News. Right? Fox News ran a story 2 nights ago on Bitcoin. Tucker Carlson starting to talk about Bitcoin more and more. Republican congressmen talking about it more and more. A bipartisan letter sent yesterday to some regulator saying you don't understand enough about Bitcoin. What's her name? Elizabeth Warren again. So all of these things happening, right? Now, what's going on Fox? Are the Republicans just into Bitcoin and it's going to become another political thing, right? So not mega politics, but political. Is it going to become a Republican Democrat thing? I don't think so, right? Inflation is such a mega political force that I think you're going to see all parties competing to get votes. Why are the Republicans doing it now? Is it because they believe in Bitcoin? Nope. No, they don't. They think inflation is a hot button issue for the 2022 elections. Am I mind reading? Maybe, but I think there are definitely some congressmen who understand Bitcoin, love Bitcoin. The rest are opportunists, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with being an opportunist here. They're seeing chances to get votes in 2022 and 2024, and therefore lining up and talking about Bitcoin because they might get something out of it. Nothing wrong with that. That's human nature. And that's what we're basing these predictions on, right? So my prediction is 2022 election, both parties are going to be talking about Bitcoin. 2024, both parties are going to be talking about Bitcoin. And the ability for social amnesia to be applied to inflation is almost non-existent. Almost non-existent, because the reminder is there every single day. It's different than a broad category of thinking of 99% and 1%. Well, if the 99% are all saying, well, I still went to the game, I still did this, I still did that, I still had a hot dog, I still got to party, blah, 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 it's not going to be a big issue. But if they can't afford to eat food, if they're reminded every single time they go to the gas pump that things are more expensive, it's a little harder for them to forget because they're reminded so often. So if you see what Fox is doing right now, it doesn't mean they get it more. It doesn't mean they studied. It doesn't mean they're even on your side. They want votes. That's mega political. Inflation is now a mega political issue, bipartisan, right? Nonpartisan. And because of that force is now injected into the system, I predict you're going to see both parties supporting Bitcoin in the short term, which makes today one of the best days, probably the best day, maybe the best day you could have to break up with the US dollar, right? So I'm not asking you to buy Bitcoin. I'm telling you to break up with the future you've built with that US dollar, because it ain't going to come about. That part of it, right, the inflation part, is going to get, it's going to catch on. It's not going to get forgotten, right? It's not going to get forgotten. Where's it all going to go? We'll talk about that on the next episode. That's all I got for today. Ciao. Sorry about that snafu with the definition of mega political, but I'll have my notes more intact next time. Bye, everyone.